Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever considered that what often looks like, straightforward economic competition might actually be part of something much bigger, a kind of unspoken grand strategy? We're diving into some really fascinating material today that definitely makes you think about how global events unfold. Today, our mission is to explore a pretty powerful perspective. It suggests a significant shift in global strategy by a dominant world power, specifically concerning the rise of another major global economy. We want to pull out the core arguments, try to understand the motivations behind this shift, at least as they're perceived, and explore the consequences, the really far-reaching ones.
Yeah, what's truly compelling here, I think, is how this particular analysis ties economic policy so directly to these broader geopolitical goals. It argues that some of the biggest moves we've seen globally, especially maybe over the last 10 years or so, they aren't just random incidents or, natural market adjustments. No, they're seen as components of a very deliberate, long-term strategic decision. It kind of posits that what we often read is just, well, economic shifts might actually be rooted much deeper in the strategic rethink of global interests.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because the narrative we're looking at today, it isn't about accidental shifts or just market forces, not at all. It makes a pretty provocative claim that sometime around, say, 2010, and definitely becoming clearer by maybe 2013, 2014, a dominant world power consciously, intentionally decided to contain the rise of another major economy. And the reason? Simply because that nation's rise was suddenly seen as, and this is the phrase used, no longer in their interest. So, not a drift, more like a sharp turn, a deliberate swerve in strategy.
Right? A swerve away from what had been for a long time a strategy of engagement, maybe integration. And if you connect that to the bigger geopolitical picture, this perspective argues that the dominant power's main goal, its grand strategy, if you like, is fundamentally about staying on top, maintaining global supremacy. And so, in that light, the rapid economic growth of this other nation started to look like a direct challenge, a threat, really, to that number one spot. The argument essentially is that an old playbook, maybe a Cold War playbook, designed for confronting a different kind of rival, was sort of dusted off and applying to this new player, which, well, it fundamentally changed the relationship, moved it towards rivalry.
From cooperation to rivalry. Yeah. It's a profound thought, though, isn't it? The very idea that the economic progress, the prosperity of 1.4 billion people could be framed as not in our interest. It does make you stop and, question the basic assumptions, right, about global economics, about how nations should interact. How does a decision like that, one that seems so counter to the whole idea of shared global growth, how does that actually turn into policy? Like, what does it look like on the ground when that kind of high-level thinking gets translated into concrete actions?
Well, according to this analysis, there's what it calls telltale evidence, almost like breadcrumbs leading back to this strategic shift. A key piece it highlights is a specific article, quite influential, published back in 2015. It came out of a major foreign policy institution, written by some prominent names. And the analysis really emphasizes that articles like this, especially from institutions with close ties to government, they're often seen, or perhaps believed, to signal decisions already made by what's often called the security state.
The security state.
You mean like the intelligence agencies, defense establishment, foreign policy circles, all that?
Exactly, that whole apparatus. So the argument is, these aren't just, academics throwing ideas around for debate. They're seen more as Washington signaling its position, telegraphing its intent, maybe, before the policies fully roll out.
Wait, that's a crucial point. It implies these aren't just theories, they're more like blueprints, a kind of roadmap. And what's really striking is how closely the specific actions proposed in that 2015 article seem to match what's actually happened over the last decade. It's almost like watching someone tick items off a list. So the first point mentioned was actively trying to create trading systems without this rising power, specifically excluding them.
Right. Creating systems that bypass them.
And we've definitely seen a push for new trade blocks, new agreements like the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, for instance. And they conspicuously don't include this particular nation, while also maybe limiting their role in existing supply chains. It feels like redrawing the economic map. Precisely. And that blueprint, according to this view, didn't just stop at trade. Point 2 explicitly called for strengthening military alliances, beefing up presence around the rising powers' geographical edges, its rimland. And we've seen that happen in very tangible ways, haven't we? New alliances, or stepped-up ones, like a UQ that's Australia, UK, US, and the Quad US, Japan, India, Australia. Plus, much stronger defense ties with countries like South Korea and Japan.
Yeah, those agreements have definitely been in the news.
So the strategy seems to be about creating a sort of strategic perimeter, a military encirclement, if you will, designed to, well, project power and contain influence. It looks like building a network of security partners to manage what's seen as a long-term challenge.
And then there's the third point, which has been maybe the most visible, impacting industries everywhere,
Yep.
imposing and then escalating bans on key technologies. We've absolutely seen those bans put in place, tightened, expanded, targeting really critical sectors, things like advanced chips, AI, telecom gear.
Yes, the semiconductor restrictions are a prime example.
Right. And the analysis suggests this isn't just about, say, protecting IP. It's seen as a direct attempt to hamstring the industrial capacity, the innovation of that rising power. Limiting access to high-end chips, for example, doesn't just slow down their tech firms. The argument is it's meant to hinder their whole industrial upgrade path. So every point on that 2015 list, this analysis claims, seems to have been systematically put into action. It suggests a coherent, long-term plan being executed.
Which brings us to another interesting concept, the sources flag, a term you hear a lot in public discussions: overcapacity.
Mm-hmm.
The analysis we've looked at is quite critical of this term, calls it a terrible, stupid term in economics. It's worth understanding why. See, fundamentally in standard economics, if a country makes goods efficiently and sells them successfully worldwide, that's usually seen as, well, strong industrial output, meeting global demand, comparative advantage even.
Not necessarily overcapacity.
Exactly. The term, according to this viewpoint, is more of a rhetorical tool. What's it really saying when a nation gets accused of having overcapacity?
Yeah.
It's basically like saying, look, you're really good at what you do, maybe too good, better and more efficient than we'd like, because frankly, it challenges our own industries. So it becomes a way, this perspective argues, to justify putting limits on that nation's industrial success, on their exports, even if those exports are strong, simply because they have great industrial capacity and are very efficient.
So it reframes their strength as a problem.
That's the argument. It raises that important question. When someone uses the term overcapacity, what does it really tell you? About the nation's actual economic ability, yes, but maybe more about the motivations of the accuser.
Okay, so if this analysis is right, if this containment strategy is really in play, what are the results? What does it mean for the world? The material we review is pretty stark here. It suggests this strategy isn't just, economically questionable, but actually dangerous, profoundly so. It claims this approach is already having huge human costs, even indirectly leading to hundreds of thousands of lives lost.
How so? Through what mechanisms?
Through things like disrupted supply chains leading to shortages, economic instability hitting vulnerable populations, averting resources from development aid or health towards military spending and confrontation. It also points to, the constant daily discussions of serious global conflict, wars, potential wars. It paints a picture of very real, tangible human consequences stemming from what started as this strategic pivot.
Well, the counter-argument presented in this material revolves around the concept of convergence. This view basically argues that the prosperity of any nation, especially one with 1.4 billion people, is fundamentally a good thing for the whole world. Think about it. More global economic activity overall, better trade opportunities for everyone involved, an easier exchange of ideas, technology. More reasons for peace, actually, because of shared economic stakes. A joint interest in keeping things stable and prosperous.
The opposite of a zero-sum game.
Exactly. And historically, the dominant world power did largely champion open markets, right? Think about institutions like the World Trade Organization. They were based on principles that facilitated global trade, competition. And that framework, arguably, is what allowed the rapid growth, the convergence of many developing nations, including this rising power. It enabled export-led growth, integration into the global economy. And this aligns with that core economic idea, going back to Adam Smith, that trade isn't zero-sum, one country's gain isn't automatically another's loss. Specialization in trade mean everyone can benefit.
That's a strong counterpoint. And the material gives examples, right? Like regions like California became incredibly wealthy over decades selling high-tech stuff, software, IP, and at the same time traded extensively with this rising power, which got really efficient at making many of the gizmos we all use.
Phones, laptops, solar panels.
Right, all that stuff. It wasn't one side winning at the expense of the other. It was, or seemed to be, about shared benefits. Each played to their strengths. That looks like mutual gain, plain and simple. It really demonstrates that convergence idea in action.
Which then leads to a critical assessment of the current mindset, what this analysis calls the zero-sum mentality. It poses a really important question. If the world's dominant powers, who actually represent a minority of the global population, if they actively try to, quote, keep the majority down or contain their natural economic rise, what happens? What are the inevitable consequences? The analysis suggests this is seen as profoundly oppressive by those on the receiving end, and it's bound to provoke resistance.
Resistance in what form?
Well, it argues this inevitably leads to cycles of confrontation, but also, significantly, the creation of alternative global structures. And we're maybe seeing hints of this already, aren't we? Nations banding together, talking about alternatives to the dollar, creating their own trade agreements, new financial institutions, things like BRICS expanding, for instance. It happens probably because they feel excluded or targeted by the existing systems, so that resistance can be economic, political, diplomatic, and it definitely reshapes the global landscape in ways that are hard to predict.
And there's a historical irony pointed out too, isn't there? According to this perspective, this current containment approach is sort of anti-historical, even antithetical to what the dominant power once seemed to stand for. I mean, historically, that power played a key role in setting up global institutions after World War II. The UN, the World Bank, the IMF.
Right, institutions built, at least in theory, on the idea of cooperation.
Exactly. They were kind of an expression of this convergence idea, treating states as equals, recognizing shared states and stability, aiming for peace through cooperation, not confrontation. So to pivot to a strategy focused on containment, as this analysis describes it, well, it seems like a major departure from those founding principles. Principles of open markets, multilateralism. So what we've really unpacked today is this truly thought-provoking perspective. It traces current global dynamics, the tensions we see, back to what it argues was a conscious strategic pivot. A really profound shift, moving away from a vision of, let's say, global convergence and mutual benefit towards a strategy of containment based on a perception of zero-sum competition. It certainly offers a different lens for looking at the headlines and the deeper currents in global affairs today. Makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does, and it leaves us with a significant question to ponder, perhaps. If, as this analysis suggests, a large part of the world actively resists being kept down or contained, how might that pushback actually reshape the global order in the decades ahead? Going beyond just trade patterns or military postures, what does it really mean for the future pursuit of, well, genuine shared prosperity and for lasting peace among all nations? What stands out to you listening to this deep dive into these powerful and perhaps unsettling strategic currents?